Or you use the last one down. You're supposed to set my lectern here. That's what Eric does for me. Good morning. How you all doing this morning? Good. Glad you're all here again. So here we are. We're still in Mark chapter 2 in our sermon series in Mark, and it's like this is our third or fourth message here, I think, and so we'll get through it. And we're into chapter 3, obviously, here. We're going into that, so Mark already read for us. And we'll see in the text that we were studying that, in essence, there's really no place in the Gospels, no matter what Gospel you're in, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, where there's someone that isn't questioning Jesus and his actions. And as usual here in our passage, it's the Pharisees that are questioning Jesus. And so that's why this morning's message is titled Questioning Authority, because that's what they did. And they questioned him about the few things that they believe Jesus is doing wrong. But as we know, Jesus never did wrong. He was perfect, of course. Even though he was perfect, that didn't stop people, the religious leaders of that time, from accusing him of doing wrong. And the thing is, people such as us that are here this morning, even though you're not doing wrong, you can still be accused of doing wrong. And so we have to think about that. Christians today, and in many ways, have been accused of terrible actions anymore. We're accused of being bigots and haters, and in fact, we can be accused of being bigots and haters and just terrible people, when in fact, true followers of Jesus are the people who love others and want the best for everyone. And we have to remember that, and we have to portray that. And I think in today's culture, we have to work extra hard at that. Does that make sense? So that people really know that we do love them, even though we don't agree with them. We're going to get to that. But remember what Jesus told his disciples in John 15:18. He says, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first," he said. "If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you." Why do people not like Christians? Well, sometimes it's our actions, but most of the time it's because they hate Jesus, right? And you may not be hated because of your faith. You may never be persecuted because you're a follower of Christ, right? But if you live for Jesus and you live like Jesus, then for sure you will be treated differently. That's just a given. You're going to be treated differently in the world. But that's okay. Because doing the right thing and being unpopular or even persecuted is better than knowing to do right and not doing it at all, okay? Jesus always did right. He always did the right thing. And Jesus is always being questioned about anything he did. And we see here in Mark chapter 2 that Jesus is questioned about fasting. Okay, fasting. Verse 18, Mark 2. "Now John's disciples and Pharisees were fasting, and some people came and asked Jesus, 'How is it that John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees are fasting, but yours are not?' Jesus answered, 'How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with them. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and on that day they will fast.'" So, fasting. For the Christians, some see fasting as a necessary discipline. For some Christians, they observe what's called Lent, right? Lent is a season of days between Ash Wednesday and Easter, and Ash Wednesday is set 40 days prior to Easter. And for those 40 days, those who are devoted followers of the Lenten season, they fast, they pray, they reflect, they repent. Today, still some observe fasts that restrict the quantity and the type of food during Lent, like red meat. That's why fish is so popular. It's not just because Arby's is running a sale on their fish sandwich. It's because they sell a lot of them, right? I love those, by the way. But many view Lent as a time to which you take a particular vice, a bad habit. You refrain from some pleasurable thing. And I tell you this because as Baptists, we don't observe Lent. I had someone call me just this past Ash Wednesday, I guess it was Ash Wednesday. I didn't even know it was Ash Wednesday. I get this call and they're like, are you guys doing Ash Wednesday service? I'm like, no, we're Baptists. We don't do that. So we just don't. And I think probably why that is we consider it to be a practice of Catholicism. And so when we kind of broke away from that, we kind of did away with those kind of things that, during the Protestant Reformation. And I'm assuming that's why it happened. But I know some people that because of this will not fast at all, right? Well, I'm not fasting because I'm not a Catholic, right? I'm not doing those things, right? I'm not doing those traditions. But fasting isn't a Catholic thing or a tenet of any faith, really. It's not an Old Testament thing because a lot of people say, well, that's Old Testament. We don't have to fast because we're New Testament believers. Fasting is a biblical thing. It really is. But for the Jewish people in Jesus' day, many considered fasting to be a required thing if you were following the law of Moses. Mark starts out here and tells us that John the Baptist's disciples and the Pharisees and their disciples, they were fasting. And they were fasting probably, if you remember from last week, they were probably fasting while Jesus and his disciples were at Levi's house having a feast and a party with sinners and tax collectors. That's probably what sparked all of this. The Old Testament prescribed fasting for all Jews only one day a year, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. That's it. That was the requirement, to fast that day. And they all did this as an act of repentance, right? And so the Pharisees came along and they promoted voluntary fast on every Monday and Thursday as an act of virtue and devotion. And if you're a good Jewish guy, you're going to do this because we said so. That's the problem. These twice-a-week fasts were generally 12-hour fasts lasting from sunup to sundown, and the Pharisees also made sure that the people knew how spiritual they were by showing everyone they were fasting. It was for show. Jesus told his followers that fasting isn't about showing people how religious you are. He said in Matthew 6:16, he says, "When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show men they are fasting. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so it will not be obvious to men that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." See, here in Mark 2, Jesus and his disciples aren't doing what the Pharisees think they should be doing. That's the problem. So they questioned Jesus about his actions and his motives, and some people came and asked Jesus, how is it that these other guys are fasting and you're not? And Jesus answered them in the most peculiar way. At least, they probably wondered why Jesus answered their question in this way. Because as he often did, Jesus answered their question with another question. Verse 19. Jesus answered, "How can the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? They cannot, so long as they have him with him. But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them, and on that day they will fast." Jesus used an illustration that everybody understood, that people there would get, and it concerned a bridal party. Like we previously talked about, like a Jewish engagement or betrothal lasted up to over a year sometimes. So it's a long process. Engagements, betrothal were a long process, so that meant that the actual wedding was a time of feasting and of great joy. This isn't the time to fast because this is the wedding day. This is the time to celebrate. And we see, where Jesus turned water into wine. It was at a wedding in Cana, right? It was a time for celebration. It was not a time to fast and to put things away. It was a time to feast. And Jesus, the Messiah, the Savior of the world, the perfect God-man, was here on earth. This was not the proper time to fast. And as we see here, one other thing that you need to notice here within this is discipleship means you're different. It really does. We talked a little bit about this in Bible group this morning about being a disciple. That is, being a growing believer in Jesus. Someone who's in the process of sanctification, becoming less like themselves and becoming more Christ-like. But that also means you're different. People who follow Jesus, it is who truly follow Jesus and what he says instead of following what people say, are Jesus' disciples today. And I hope you're one of them. I really hope that you're following what Jesus says instead of what the world tells you, right? Because that's important. This 2 times a fast a week kind of thing wasn't a commandment. It was man-made. It was a man-made thing they did just to add a little extra juice to their outward show of righteousness. Jesus and his disciples were not abiding by these man-made rules of fasting because they were different. They didn't need to. And by being different, by following Jesus, it was Jesus' disciples who were really, if you think about it, because they're following Jesus, they're the most holy. And being holy means to be set apart, to be different. They're not letting these Pharisees and what everybody else is doing there in Galilee, what they're doing, they're not allowing that to follow. They're not following that. They're not allowing them to influence them. They're being different, not following the world in the sinful ways or even a set of man-made religious rules. But to be holy, you are different and you're set apart as you follow the Lord. And you do what he says and you do what he did by living according to his word. And when you follow Jesus like that, you are a true disciple. You are in the process of discipleship and the process of sanctification, where you become more Christ-like. And another thing we see here, not only does discipleship mean you're different, but discipleship brings gladness, not sadness. The Pharisees, they fasted miserably. That is, their supposed devotion to God made them miserable and caused them to suffer. And Jesus' disciples, and get this, the sinners and tax collectors were at Levi's house and they were having a good time, and these Pharisees, and they're fasting. And they're looking like, what are you guys doing? You guys are having a party. You're supposed to be fasting. Jesus says, no, this is not the time. It's time for gladness, not sadness. And that's true with disciples of Jesus today. We saw in our sermon series in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for everything. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. There's a time to fast and a time not to fast. Jesus says, as a person who's following him, this is a time for gladness, not sadness. And I say this because too many times I have witnessed miserable Christians. Just miserable. What I mean is they had no joy in their life. That spiritual fruit the Bible calls the joy of the Lord was completely missing in their life. They were miserable people. And so here's the thing about miserable people. They want everybody else around them to be miserable too, right? Have you ever noticed that? Yeah. Yes, they do. It's true that misery loves company. If they're not happy about something, they want everyone to be unhappy about the same thing. And all they do is complain. And I can understand people who don't have the Lord Jesus as their Savior, right? But actual believers can be this way. They can be sad. They complain about this. They complain about that. The church shouldn't be doing this. The church shouldn't be doing that. This other believer is doing this and they shouldn't be doing that. I wouldn't do it that way, or I would do it that way. You get the picture, and I'm being generic here because if I got specific, you might think I was talking about you, right? But look, we all complain, and at times we're unsatisfied with life and the things that are happening in our life and the way things are going. But if you have Jesus, you have a lot to be joyous about. You have a time where this is a time for gladness and not sadness. To follow Jesus means you take up your cross daily and you follow him. That's the joy that you have, and it doesn't make sense, but it really truly works if you're truly a disciple. And notice I said daily you pick up your cross, because being a true disciple isn't just a Sunday thing. I want you to know that. It's a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week lifestyle. No matter where you're at, no matter who you're with, you're a disciple. Let me tell you, that's quite a commitment. It really is. It's really a commitment. But that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And we see here that discipleship causes complete change. It's a total transformation. No longer did the disciples Jesus called follow their religious rulers and man-made rules. They didn't do that anymore. Instead, they followed Jesus. The peer pressure to cave in and show everyone just how righteous you were no longer mattered to them. They didn't care what people thought about them. They didn't care what the Pharisees said about them. They didn't care what these other people who are over here fasting while they're over here having a good meal. They didn't care what they said. It didn't matter to them because they recognized that what Jesus taught and what Jesus was saying carried some weight. Jesus taught with one who had authority, right? So following Jesus just made sense. It's like, this Jesus guy, I'm telling you, I started following him. He called me. I started following him. And man, I've changed my mind about a lot of things that I thought were right. I see them as wrong now. I see the things that I thought were wrong. They're right now. Discipleship, right? It's transformation. Happens sometimes, we talk about this in Bible group. Sometimes it's like instant change, and sometimes it's a process of change. So Jesus' disciples, although they just beginning their journey with Jesus here, had them rethinking things, had them acting differently, had them trusting in Jesus completely. And with that trust came total life change. That's what Jesus meant in verse 21. No one sews a patch on unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, he pours new wine into new wineskin. And what Jesus is pointing out here is that it's impossible to stitch Jesus onto an old, tattered religious garment. You can't take Jesus and just sew him on to the old religious system. That just doesn't work, right? The religious system that had to be made new by faith in Jesus. It was, however, that old religious system was, however, to set up for the Messiah, for the Savior to come. But it was never meant to be able to save anyone by keeping the commandments. Because only Jesus could do that. No one else could do that. We're all sin and fall short of the glory of God, right? But it's through the good news of what Jesus did, that Jesus lived a perfect life. That he came to earth, he lived perfect life. He was crucified on a cross, and he was buried, and he was raised again the third day. That's the gospel. And people hear that about Jesus and his work on the cross, and that's what brings salvation to everyone who believe. Just like you can't put new wine in an old wineskin or it will bust, you can't put Jesus into religion that is based on human works. Jesus says it's not going to work that way. What I'm saying is religion doesn't save you. Being a Baptist doesn't save you. Coming to church every Sunday doesn't save you. Keeping man-made rules cannot save you. Only faith in Jesus can save you. See, even today there are religions who try to convince you that you can work your way into heaven. That if you just do more good deeds and you've done bad deeds in your life, then God will allow you in. But the truth is, it's found in Titus 3:5. It says, not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us, through the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Spirit. Be very careful of people like the Pharisees that tell you you have to follow a man-made list of rules in order to become righteous in God's eyes. The only way you can ever be righteous is because you have believed in Jesus, and it is his righteousness that is put into your account. So Jesus was questioned about the issue of fasting. So I hope you understand that part of it. And then now we see here in the next part that Jesus is questioned about the Sabbath. This is one thing after another, right? Verse 23. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? He answered, have you ever read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And already here in just 2 chapters of Mark, Jesus has offended the Jewish religious leaders big time. Notice, Jesus has not violated any commandment. He's not violated any of God's laws. So that's not why they're up in arms about this. They're upset with Jesus because he has violated the traditions and the rules of men. The Sabbath was and still is a big deal to Jews, right? Today, for Jewish people, on the Sabbath, it begins Friday night at sundown and it goes all the way through Saturday to sundown. That's their Sabbath. During that time, there's no work allowed. None at all. My Hebrew teacher told me that even today in Jerusalem, I probably told you guys this before, because I remember this, because when she told me this, I was like flabbergasted. She said, in all the buildings, office building, high-rises or whatever, she said all the elevators are programmed to stop at every floor because you don't want to push a button because that's work. Yeah. So that's what, okay, so you see how things can get out of proportion, right? Keeping the Sabbath, I will say, is one of the 10 Commandments. And just as a reminder, Exodus 20, verse 8 says, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you and your son, your daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." This commandment, if you think about it, gives us more detail and explanation than all the other 9. So when they assumed Jesus was breaking the Sabbath by picking a few heads of grain to eat, they considered it work. And it really enraged them. So much so that it was one of the main reasons they wanted Jesus dead. Now, eating grain out of a person's field was okay according to God's law. Deuteronomy 23:25 says it's okay. As long as you don't cut the crop down, you can pick the head of grain to eat. So that's not the issue. Plucking a little grain to eat was just the same as harvesting, though, the Pharisees said. If you pluck a few grains to eat on the Sabbath, you might as well be out there working in the field, harvesting the crop. So they demanded an explanation. In verse 25, Jesus answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God, and he ate the consecrated bread, which was lawful only for the priest to eat. He also gave some to his companions." And what we see here is a disciple follows Jesus when nobody else understands. All right? And this is important. So for the men who were following Jesus, they trusted that Jesus was okay with them eating a few pieces of grain, right? Because they were hungry. Jesus didn't say anything, so it must not be a bad thing. They understood that. And you see here when Jesus was questioned, he appealed to Scripture. And because it was okay for King David, when him and his men were hungry, to eat the bread that was only meant for the priest, it was okay for Jesus and his disciples to eat a few heads of grain when they were hungry, even if it was on the Sabbath. The Pharisees didn't get it. They didn't understand how Jesus could just completely not see their point of view. But for the disciples, they got it. They understood what Jesus was meaning, and so they didn't let the Pharisees influence them in any way. So, okay, how does this relate to what we face in our time? Well, I think, just like I put on the outline here, a real disciple of Jesus follows Jesus when nobody else understands. As a believer and disciple of Jesus, you obey him and follow him, even if no one understands why you're doing it. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, why? Why do you go to church every Sunday? Why are you wasting your time serving at the church? Why are you going on a mission trip? Why would you give your hard-earned money to the church? Why are you quitting your job and going back to school? Why are you leaving a home that you've always lived at and you raised your kids in and in the village that you lived in all your life? Why are you leaving that and moving to Indiana? And last but not least, Why in the world would you move to Illinois? Right? These are seriously questions I've been asked as I follow Jesus. Now, obviously, the people who asked me these questions did not understand a bit, but I understood it, Mona understood it, and Jesus understood it, and that's all that matters, right? Hey. So if you're a disciple, then you can understand the reason of things that others cannot. And as a disciple of Jesus, a disciple does the right thing, okay? Jesus explained to these Pharisees, look, me and my guys, we've been out doing ministry, and we're coming through home, we're coming through this field, it was a Sabbath, but we were hungry, so we ate. Look, our greatest king, King David, did the same thing. Don't you think he had the right to eat that bread? This isn't the only time Jesus is looked at as a Sabbath breaker here. This is a continuing theme throughout the Gospels. But King David did what he had to do when he was hungry. Put all this in perspective. Luke 14. You write this down on your outline. I'll just read it. Luke 14, 1 through 6 tells us, one Sabbath when Jesus went to eat at the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy, and Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in law, is it unlawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. Then he asked them, if one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, would you not immediately pull them out? And they had nothing to say. The point is, if you have a son, if you even have an ox, right? And they fall into a well on the Sabbath, you would work to get them out, wouldn't you, Jesus asked? Well, this is a rhetorical question because the answer is, of course you would. Absolutely you would. And that's the point. Here's the thing, a follower of Christ always is supposed to do the right thing when the right thing is required to do. And by right thing, I mean what the Word of God says is right. And I say this because society anymore, just like the Pharisees back in Jesus' day, can lead you astray by making up things that they say is right. Does that make sense? So let the Lord lead by knowing and following His Word and doing the right things when the right time is required to do the right thing. What you want to understand is what we as Christians consider the Sabbath, right? Which is it's what some people call the Christian Sabbath is Sunday because we meet on Sunday. But it's really not. Verse 27. See, the disciple understands Sabbath rest. And so on verse 27, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So why did God institute the Sabbath? Think about that. I think because He knows how frail we are. In the creation account, we are told that on the seventh day, God rested. Why? Was He tired of working 6 days straight? No. He rested as an example for us to follow. Look, we all need some time to rest and get refreshed. Someone said the other day, I think it was in Bible group on Sunday morning, that coming to church on Sunday, having this time of worship, coming and having fellowship, is a time to get refreshed and get recharged for what's coming this next week, right? It's important. All work and no play doesn't make Jack just a dull boy. It wears him out and it burns him out. I saw in person this past week how I had one job and it was making bearings and I was working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I did that for about a year and I had to get out of there. I knew I was in trouble when I asked the guy, we had a bunch of boring mills. So with my boring mill that I ran, there was me and another guy. It ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never stopped. And I knew I was in trouble when I asked the guy that was working the other shift for me, I said, do you have any family? He's like, yeah, I have a daughter. I said, do you ever see her? He says, yeah, I see her when we go on vacation. I'm like, okay. I said, I was like, that's crazy. He told me, he's like, she doesn't care. She just likes to spend my money. I was like, I got to get out of here, right? Can I tell you, your children would rather spend quality time with you than spend your money? That's a fact. God gave the time of rest, the time of refreshment, the time to spend quality time with your loved ones one day out of 7 for people to rest from their labor. So the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And for Christians, we know that we take this one day and we worship Jesus. Again, why? Why do you go to church every Sunday? Because Jesus is worthy of our worship. Jesus and His Word refreshes us. It recharges us so we can put up with people like you the rest of the week, right? It's a day we worship Jesus because He is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's worthy of our worship and our honor. And all work and no play makes people wore out. I agree with that, but all play and no worship produces immature disciples. And you can't be a disciple unless you're not learning and you're not growing and you're not becoming closer to the Lord. Being a disciple, as well as anything else in life, it's a balance. Work, family, rest, worship. It all goes together. To produce in us, all these things work together to produce in us a disciple that Jesus wants us to be. So now we switch.
I don't have a family.
Well, you do right here, Angie.
I know I do.
Okay.
My sisters, though.
So we switch from chapter 2, we go into chapter 3 here because I think it goes with what we've been looking at so far. Verse 1. Another time he went into the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he could heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked him, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. In these verses, instead of Jesus answering the questions with, Scripture, he's going to answer their questions with action. We see in this episode Jesus in a synagogue. It's one of the many places Jesus ministered. He ministered all over, but a lot of times it was in a synagogue. And we see here it was the Sabbath day in a synagogue, the day set aside for rest and worship. Synagogue was not only a place to worship, but it was also their town hall, it was their school, it was their meeting place. And the idea of the synagogue came about during their Babylonian exile. They built these buildings called a synagogue to worship in when they was in Babylon. When they came back from Babylon to Judea and Galilee and all these other places, they still built synagogues. And the only requirement to have a synagogue in a town was that you had 10 Jewish men. If you had 10 Jewish men, you could have a synagogue. So, Jesus was there this one day. There was a man that attended that synagogue. A man that probably regularly attended that synagogue. He had a withered hand. Don't know if it was because of an injury or if he was born that way. Doesn't matter. All we know is he can't use it. Unusable. One translation says shriveled, another says withered, but the fact is, it doesn't work. And everyone in that synagogue knows about this man's hand. And so, what do you know here? Verse 2. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. See, the Pharisees always sought opportunities to accuse. Always. If you read the gospel in their entirety, and if you didn't know any better, you would come away with the idea that the Pharisees' only job was to trap Jesus and catch him doing something wrong. Well, mainly when Jesus was around, you would be right about that. I mean, they were obsessed with Jesus. They were obsessed with finding a reason to accuse Jesus. And unfortunately, people still do the same thing today. But since Jesus isn't personally here right now, they look to his disciples to accuse. And I have to say, sometimes the things they accuse us of are warranted. Christians can be judgmental. We can act holier than thou, and we think we're better than other people. And it doesn't have to be unbelievers that we think we're better than, because we can even think we're better than other Christians. Right? Even, I'm a Southern Baptist, so I'm better than this Baptist, right? All too often, unbelievers get a totally wrong idea about Christians. Yes, we have opinions about certain topics. Yes, we uphold biblical truth in the public forum. Yes, we call wrong, wrong, and right, right, and according to God's word, but that doesn't make us haters of anyone or any group. This is where our society, and that is, if you have a differing opinion or you don't accept their truth, then you must hate them. And nothing can be further from the truth. Because if you truly love people, and as Jesus' disciples were to love everyone, you got to tell them about Jesus. You got to let them know that Jesus died on the cross to save them from their sin, right? Just like he did for all who believe, just like he did for me, just like he did for you if you're a believer. I believe Jude 23, here's another one right down on your outline. Jude verse 23 explains this very well. It says, rescue others by snatching them from the flames. Rescue others by snatching them from the flames of judgment. Show mercy to still others, but do so with great caution, hating the sins that contaminate their lives. I think that you guys remember the saying, hate the sin, love the sinner? I think it came from Jude verse 23. Hate the sin, love the sinner. So here again in Mark 3, Jesus answers a question with a question. Yet again, Jesus' question goes unanswered. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or evil, to save a life or kill? But they remained silent. Again, for those who accuse Jesus as well as his disciples, when a question is asked of them, they usually don't have an answer. For the people in our culture today who literally hate Christians for what they stand for, and you ask them why, they either don't have an honest answer or they will give you some pat answer that they've heard from someone else. All this says they've never truly studied the Bible. They never truly looked at Jesus. They've never really sought to understand who Jesus was and what he did. They just usually know what they've been taught. In reality, what is happening, and I see this, what is happening in our culture, and it's happened for thousands of years, but especially lately, Satan has put blinders on people so they can't see the truth. They don't want to know the truth. It keeps them from seeing the truth of Jesus. And we complain about the shape of our country, and we complain about, and we worry about the direction people are going in. But let me ask you this. When's the last time you literally prayed for the people in our country that's going in the wrong direction? When's the last time you've actually prayed for revival? Not just in our country, but around the world, right? Here in Mark 3, these Pharisees know that there's something different. There's something about this Jesus guy. He's definitely different. I believe they know that, and his accusers know that Jesus has the authority and the power that only they can imagine. He has it, we don't. The Pharisees know, and we have seen that all the people knew that Jesus taught with authority. This Jesus guy from Nazareth, he's done some pretty amazing things. And when we ask him a question, we try to accuse him, he turns it right back around on us and it makes us look silly. So in response to their inquiry, Jesus takes action. He looked at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts and said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out and his hand was completely healed. Then the Pharisees got this plot with the Herodians on how they could kill Jesus. Here's something I want you to notice here. What's going on in this synagogue on this one Sabbath day? That is, this is a divine human cooperative. Okay. What do you mean, Pastor, a human divine cooperative? That doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. It's a human divine cooperative because look what Jesus does. He asks the man with the shriveled hand to open his hand and stretch it out. I'm sure he's tried this millions of times in his life. I can't do it. Jesus says, do it. All right? If the man would have refused to stretch out his hand, he would not have been healed. The Lord did his part. The man did his part. So what part was that the man did, right? He stretched out his hand. He trusted that Jesus could heal it. It's all faith. By stretching out his hand, he was healed. It's kind of the same thing in your salvation. Jesus has done all the work necessary in order for you to be saved. He has made a way for you to come to him in faith, but you have to do your part and respond. You have to put your trust in Jesus, and you will be saved. Acts 16:31 says, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved." The Spirit of God has spoken to your heart this morning. I say this at least every other week. You may be here this morning, and you've been to church all your life, but you've never truly repented of your sin and put your trust in Jesus, right? It's okay to come and do that today. Nobody will think any different of you. Nobody will say, oh, no. This is the time. We're living in difficult times. This is the time to come to Jesus, right? Today's the day of salvation. So if the Spirit of God has spoken to your heart this morning, you would like to put your trust in him for your salvation, you can do that. Jesus can and will save you, but you got to respond. So please come forward as we sing our closing song. Let's pray.